Two men in the remote wilderness celebrating the thrill of a successful elk hunt are ambushed by not one, but two ferocious grizzly bears. And in seconds, everything turned into a fight for survival. This is the tragic and chilling story of Mark Uptain and Chubon, who were mauled by grizzly bears while elk hunting in Wyoming, USA. So what is this story all about? How weren't they able to defend themselves? Let's find out what happened to the two men in today's video. The calm before the storm. The Teton Wilderness in the state of Wyoming is breathtakingly remote, known for its dense forests, jagged peaks, and the wildlife that call it home. This rugged landscape is approximately 585,000 acres in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem and is part of the Bridger-Teton National Forest. It's a haven for hundreds of grizzly bears preparing for hibernation each autumn. Our story is from a clear, warm day on September 14, 2018, when 37-year-old Mark Uptain, a seasoned hunting guide, and Chubon, a bow hunter from Florida, embarked on an elk hunt that would take a tragic turn. Mark was a professional hunting guide and was known for his calm demeanor, survival skills, and deep respect for nature. His clients trusted him, knowing he could handle anything the wilderness threw at them. His client that day was Chubon from New Smyrna Beach, Florida, who was new to the area and had taken Mark as his guide to the rugged demands of the Tetons. Despite his inexperience, he had traveled across the country for this dream hunt, trusting Mark's expertise to make it memorable. The two men teamed up and ventured into the Teton Wilderness, prepared for a challenging hunt. They were deep in grizzly country, around 5 miles from the nearest trailhead, in an area accessible only by horseback. Their equipment included horses to transport themselves and their gear, a bow for hunting, and a pistol for protection, a Glock 10mm, though its role would later become a point of tragic debate. Corey, eager for his first big game kill in the rugged Wyoming wilds, carried his bow as the primary weapon. Mark managed much of the heavy lifting, tracking the elk, setting up camp, and navigating through the dense forests. Trouble brews. The moment Chubon had been waiting for came just after dawn. He and Mark Uptain had been tracking the bull elk for hours, moving through the dense, steep terrain of the Teton Wilderness. Corey's bow was ready as they approached a clearing. Then through the trees they saw it, a massive bull elk. Corey slowly nocked an arrow, keeping an eye on the elk. Mark, being the guide, gave him a nod. The elk didn't see them yet. Corey took a deep breath and aimed, drawing his bow back with practiced precision. The arrow flew straight and true, striking the elk with a thud. He had successfully hit his mark. Although the shot was good, it wasn't a fatal one, and the elk was able to run off. The animal disappeared into the trees, leaving only a trail of blood behind. Mark was the expert here, so he signaled Corey to keep following the elk. They grabbed their gear and set off after the wounded elk, knowing that their job wasn't done until they'd tracked it down. The pursuit continued, deep into the wilderness, where their fate would soon take a dangerous turn. The sun had gone down at this point, and it was no use roaming in danger while it was dark, so the men decided to go after the wounded elk the next morning and return to camp. The attack. The next morning, Mark and Corey began their search for their hunted elk. They had spent the last evening preparing to continue the search for the animal and decided to head out early and get the job done. With only their horses and gear, they set out for the deep wilderness, about 5 miles from the trailhead, where few others ventured. The plan was simple: find the elk, process it, and head back. But Mark, with his experience in these wild, grizzly-infested lands, was already on high alert. As they reached the area where the elk had been shot, they discovered that it had made it farther than expected, leaving behind only faint blood signs and drag marks through the dense terrain. They decided to press on, determined to recover the animal. After several hours of searching, they finally spotted it. The carcass hadn't been touched by other scavengers, and it looked a perfect hunt. It wasn't just the grizzlies that would take advantage of a fresh kill, but any predator in the area. Mark and Corey began field dressing the animal, gutting it to prepare the meat for transport. As they opened up the dead animal, the smell of fresh blood and meat filled the air. It was like a signal for hungry predators, especially bears nearby. But what Mark and Corey didn't realize was that they had already ventured into one of the most dangerous zones for bear encounters, too far from help, surrounded by dense woods and isolated in a remote part of the wilderness. What seemed like a routine task in the morning soon spiraled into a nightmare: the struggle for survival. As Mark Uptain and Chubon were absorbed in their task of removing the elk's head, the silence around them wasn't as innocent as it seemed. The fresh kill had alerted 2 grizzly bears, and they charged toward the 2 men, moving in closer and closer without being noticed. They were hungry, and the opportunity was too good to pass up. A sudden rumble of rocks, and then, from out of nowhere, 2 grizzly bears burst onto the scene. The attack was quick and brutal. Mark was positioned closest to the bear and had no time to react as the bear charged at him. He tried to yell and wave his arms violently to scare the bears, but it was of no use. Corey was caught off guard and scrambled to grab the Glock 10mm pistol, but it was too far from reach. At last, he was able to point the gun at the attacking bear, but he accidentally ejected the gun while trying to disengage the safety. At this point, the grizzly had lunged at Mark, knocking him down and attacking viciously. Mark was fatally mauled by the bear, but Corey somehow managed to escape, running toward their horses for help. But the situation was grim. The remote location, the distance from any help, and the brutal nature of the attack left little hope for a rescue in time. The tragic aftermath. Corey was badly shaken and wounded, but managed to pull himself together long enough to think about survival. His first instinct was to get away from the bears and try to reach help. Corey knew the danger wasn't over. He was still miles away from the nearest trailhead, and there was no one around to assist. Corey's last view of Mark was him being on his feet, fighting the bear, but he had to run to call for help. Fighting through pain and panic, Corey had to run 2 horses 300 or 400 yards uphill, all while hearing yells from behind. He had a satellite phone with him and found a high enough point to send out an SOS, hoping against hope that someone would receive the signal. The distress call was received, and a rescue team was dispatched. Corey had to wait 2 hours to be flown out of the wilderness and could only pray for Mark's life. Rescue. Search and rescue teams, including a helicopter, were quickly dispatched to the remote location. The helicopter had to fly over rugged mountain ridges and dense forests, and Corey, still clinging to hope, had to wait for hours. Rescue teams on the ground searched difficult trails and made their way through the wilderness as fast as they could, but the clock was ticking. By the time they arrived, it was already too late. Mark Uptain had succumbed to his injuries. He suffered 38 puncture wounds and 14 ripping or tearing wounds, but the reason for his death was massive blood loss from deep injuries to his upper thighs on both legs. He also suffered a crushing wound to the back of his head. The team later shot a healthy 250-pound sow grizzly and euthanized the younger attacking bear. And although Corey had survived, the attack had left him physically and emotionally scarred. He sustained injuries to his arms, chest, and ankles, but he was able to recover and flew back home to Smyrna Beach, Florida. Mark Uptain was a small business owner and left behind a wife and 5 children. He is remembered to this day as a loving family man and expert guide who just had his death written that tragic way. Subscribe to our channel for more interesting videos and press the like button if you like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon in another video.